Hey, welcome back to another episode of Simple Healthy Choices for Weight Loss. And today is another interview, and this one is going to be another great interview. And this was a good friend of mine, Angela Jenkins. We've known each other for 28 years now. And Angela, thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
And right now, I'm going to let my wife, Theresa, tell you a little bit about Angela.
Okay, so Angela Jenkins has been registered dietitian for 32 years in conventional and consulting capacities. During her years as a pediatric dietitian and in functional nutrition, she became intrigued by the confusing outcomes of some of her clients and began that deeper dive into root cause to find an explanation. This led her down the path of understanding how our mismanaged industrialized food system model influences people's health quite negatively in America. She comes to the table illuminating the ideal that food raised regeneratively not only keeps the body healthy, but also nurtures the ecosystems and local economies that keep our communities bonded. Come visit and enjoy the understanding that building a connection between food, regenerative agriculture, and putting your hands in the soil not only supports health, but it absolutely dependent on it. She also enjoys encouraging people toward the connection of producing their own food, no matter how great or small the garden or growing operation, and how easily that food can be prepared in the comfort of their own kitchen, making the right choice the easy choice. When she's not playing with food, she can be found wandering the Ozark Mountains, lakes, and streams with her dog Remo. And we're also at the end here, she's going to talk about her book that's going to be coming out, and we'll get more information at the end. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you talk about playing with your food, playing in the soil. You're always talking about playing in the soil and
Oh, yes.
how you love it.
It's all about playing with food.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's crazy how we met. 28 years ago, we both worked in the same hospital. Angela was with dietary, with the nutrition. What was it?
Food nutrition services.
Food nutrition services. And I was in pharmacy. And it's amazing how over the 28 years, our lives have just wound together. And now we both have gone on to even further our passion. It just so happens our passion is the same thing. We're wanting to get people healthy and let them know that it's going to be with real food and not with this ultra processed food. So Angela, why don't you let us know what you think of what's going on?
Boy, that's a loaded question.
It was supposed to be.
Right. On purpose. I guess I'd like to point out, as we were talking beforehand, how you and I met was, obviously in the hospital, but one of the patients that we both influenced us greatly was this young child that had insulin resistance. And, it's just devastating to watch children at a very young age.
How young was the child?
2.5 years old, I think.
2.5 years old with insulin resistance?
Yes.
Isn't that unheard of?
Not anymore.
No, it used to be, but ever since our dietary guidelines, we're starting to see that more and more every single year.
Right.
But anyway, go ahead.
Right. So that just impacts you. I mean, your heart just hurts because you're looking at this family going, what can I do? Doing a diet history, which of course was my part of it. I thought, oh my gosh, I mean, all this child eats, it wasn't a calories in, calories out issue, which is what we traditionally talk about. Dietitians for years were like, well, you need to stop overeating. Well, it's not directly, I mean, yes, that's a component of it, and watching serving sizes and that sort of thing. But a lot of it has to do with ensuring that you're eating the right things. And when we have this large scale availability of all of this junk food, it's very difficult, in particular for families that have limited access to healthy food, to eat well. And so that's when I started looking at things and going, oh my gosh, and that family was one of those instances whereby, their access to food, probably closest access, was most likely a convenience store, in which case you're not going to be able to get healthy food because of the way our food systems are set up.
Exactly. And that's why I don't even like to use the term junk food anymore. I use poison. I mean, just call it what it is.
It is.
And because if people think of it as junk food, they're thinking, oh, I know it's not that good for me, but I'm filling my belly. It's like, oh no, it's much worse than that. It actually it poisons your body. I mean, there's so many detrimental effects. True. And I think that's why I love what you've ended up doing now with your life, explaining to people about how how important our soil is, the bacteria, the fungus, everything in the soil. So, so go along. Just out of curiosity, with that 2.5-year-old girl, child, because I wasn't in there when you were talking to him. Is that what you talked to him about? Is eating healthy food? Is that the kind of the direction you went with this?
Absolutely. Yeah. And like a lot of conversations go, especially when you're trying to influence dietary intake, it was met with a lot of resistance. So, you do the best you can with what you have. You provide the information that you can, but essentially, I wish I could take all these people home with me, come play in the yard. Let's go play in the dirt. Let me show you how to do this. But in their particular case, I mean, that just wasn't going to happen,
Right.
It just wasn't going to. And so you're met with this, okay, so what do we do? How do we do this differently?
Mm-hmm.
And so I kept asking myself that question. Of course, that's where this was ultimately where the book came from, it, because it has to do with the fact that our food systems are so broken that, if what these people have access to is that it's not going to change for them. And Mom, I believe, I can't like verbatim, but she basically said, yeah, that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I'm like, oh, okay, then you need to understand what the ultimate outcome of this is going to be. And that is that your child will ultimately not be well at a very young age. If you're insulin resistant at 2.5 years of age, statistically speaking, you are more likely earlier on in life to become diabetic. And I mean, I don't know what the outcome of that for that child was, but
And really, once you have insulin resistance, you are diabetic. I mean, basically, by the time you get insulin resistance, there's a lot of stuff that's been going on inside your body that whole time. So this isn't a time to try to decide, well, should I eat healthy or should I not? It's like, no, the choice is you need to eat healthy, because it's so sad, because these young people, they have no idea how detrimental this is to the body until they start getting older, and they start getting around it used to be around their 50s and 60s when they started seeing all the adverse effects, all the cardiovascular effects, the high blood pressure, the high cholesterol, high glucose, high triglycerides, all the kidneys failing, amputations, everything. We used to see that to like 50s or 60s, 50 or 60-year-olds. And now we're starting to see that in 30 and 40-year-olds, because this horrible nutrition is starting from birth.
Yeah. And younger.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it starts when they're in utero. And that's why if you're a pregnant mother, please start eating healthy. Please stay away from processed food. Eat real meat, real fruit, real vegetables, and try to stay away from all this ultra processed stuff. You will do you and your child so much good.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway.
Those are generational influence. Yes. Exactly.
And there I go again. Oops.
Right. So in one part, when I was reading the bio, I like how you said about making the right choice the easy choice. So if you want to expand on that one a little bit, because
sure, that's like
huge.
That's a big deal.
Uh-huh.
It was funny because I don't have a great way to explain it until like yesterday. So I'm glad you asked.
Okay.
For me, it's all about building a relationship with food. But how do you do that? One of the ways that you do that is with, by growing your own food. I mean, it takes on a totally different meaning insofar as like, if you're growing, like if you bring your kids outside and everybody's putting their hands in the soil, not only is that a healthy act just in and of itself, but all of a sudden you've got something you're invested in, you're totally invested in. Okay, so I've got these tomatoes now in the yard. What am I going to do with them? All of a sudden, like, you start thinking very differently about what you have available to you. And then you begin to create. Okay, so you might make them into salsa. You might just slice them up and put them on a hamburger. You might do a variety of things with it. But regarding the explanation from yesterday, which I just absolutely love this because it so works this way. I was on Twitter on a friend's account, or not Twitter, LinkedIn, and they were trying to facilitate behavior change by getting people in this office building, which is only a 3 or 4 story building. They were trying to facilitate the change from using the elevator all the time to taking the stairs. And so what they did was they put up a sign and said, we'd really like for you to use the elevator. Well, it didn't change the usage of the elevator. So they put up a bigger sign. Dietitians love this. Well, I'm going to say this louder. Let's put up a bigger sign. See if they listen now.
That's right.
Right. It's like arguing with your spouse. I'm going to say it louder. No, sorry, it's not helping. So they put up a bigger sign, and of course, it still doesn't change. Okay. Then what they did, they thought about it further. What they did is they changed the wait times on the elevator, that it pushed it just far enough because we're a society of convenience now. If it's not convenient for us, we're not going to do it, to where people started taking the stairs because it was more work for them to stand longer in front of the elevator than to take the stairs, because it's only four stories. The facility that we worked for previously, you've got 9 flights of stairs, and I never didn't take the stairs, but that's just how I'm wired.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I took the stairs all the time.
So they've got people taking the stairs because they're kind of annoyed that they have to stand around. Okay. So then what they did is they changed the wait times back on the elevator, and guess what? Everybody still took the stairs.
Oh, nice.
Well, that's cool. I didn't even know you could change the time on the elevators.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So if you take that in context and you then apply it to any other aspect of your life, okay, why does it take longer wait times for somebody to decide to change? If you can have that perspective of, I'm invested in doing this differently for this reason, then when the benefits outweigh the energy that you have to put into it, because I'm just going to be honest, sometimes in order to eat right, you have to do that, what I call that upfront investment, because then on the back end, when things are stressful and you're not wanting to do things right, and I say right, that's a relative term, but if you're not wanting to do things right, if you're gravitating towards the convenience of it, you have to recognize that ultimately that's not what's best for you. And then you decide differently,
right?
And so I love using food systems development as an explanation for that, because when I go to the farmer's market, for instance, I'm totally invested in making sure that I support my local producer, especially after what happened with COVID, because these people stood firm on making sure that food was available, healthy food was available to us over the long term, despite what was going on in the world. And that was a very big deal. And so there's relationships, if nothing else, even though it's maybe not convenient, because, farmers markets are not one-stop shopping like it is at Walmart, because you can pick up everything there, but you can't at the farmers market. I'm still invested in making that extra effort, just like the example I provided, like walking the stairs, that extra effort to make sure that those systems are supported, which ultimately does end up influencing my health, especially if you're supporting the people who have it figured out and are doing it right. So
exactly. I agree 100%. And actually what we've done is we've just broken it up. We're like, if we're going to buy food, we don't go to a grocery store. We'll go to the local market, the farmer's market. We'll get our meat, get our fruits, vegetables, whatever we want from there. And then if we want toiletries and that kind of stuff, then we'll go to a store for that. But we just got it broke up that way. There's never a reason for us to get food from a supermarket anymore.
That's awesome.
If we can,
That's awesome.
Definitely in the summer, in the summer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Summertime, there's so much access to food.
Yeah. We don't have a garden.
Yeah.
Well, you just got us recently, I guess last year, playing in the dirt at our house.
Yeah.
So we gave up all Roundup. We don't spray for anything, and now we're pulling weeds.
Yeah. Awesome. In fact, I was very, very, very mad at Angela just about 2 hours ago when I was out there seeing all the weeds that we hadn't pulled in a while, thinking, we could have sprayed Roundup on this last or a few years ago before Angela knows. Now I'm sitting there digging them all up by the roots so they won't come back, which makes so much more sense. And now it's done. It's like it was that easy. So
it's done for good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's that front end effort that makes the right choice the easy choice when you understand what the ultimate implications are with it. And it is so much easier, but people don't see it that way, because getting out and getting on your hands and knees and pulling it out by hand is more work.
It is.
On the front end. On the back end, you then don't have any weeds for a long time. They'll still creep in eventually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're so much easier to take care of.
Exactly. Yeah. So just like you came to our house, so that you help people, like you teach classes, is that right?
I had been this year. I kind of backed off of it just because I've got so much going on in the book coming out, and still trying to work some, and just you have.
Well, I just thought it was really fascinating, because to think about what you're trying to show us to do in our yard. Just we live in a big neighborhood. Everybody's got Roundup, and which we did too. So we're trying to do our little part. But what's happening with the soil when you think of regenerative farming and all that stuff, right? Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Oh, sure, boy.
And just so you know, we did have Spencer Boyd on here also.
Oh, nice.
And which, if any of you listen to our podcast with Spencer Boyd, he was a regenerative farmer, and Angela's actually the one who told us about him. When we went to the farmers market. So thank you for that introduction. That was wonderful. So now I'm curious to see what you think or what you say regenerative farming is.
Yeah. I call Spence, and this is part of like food systems development stuff. I call Spence my meat guy because I get all my meat from him. But he raises it regeneratively. And, he and I have had those conversations about, he's like, Ange, I wish that I could have had you out to the farm to actually test it before and after so I could see what's actually from the microbial standpoint, what's going on down underneath the soil, because it's a big deal, big deal what he's doing. Regenerative farming. And in fact, I have to write it down, like I make references to it because there's a lot to it. Regeneration of the soil cannot be done in the context of using things like glyphosate, because part of the regeneration has to do with the microbial base in the soil. So that's why, like in my book, I make the distinction of regenerative or regenerative, but organic, because some people, people gravitate to the organic standard as the gold standard, but we need to take it further than that, because the organic standard does not actually regenerate the soil. Okay. It doesn't do that. So regeneration of the soil is the important part of it. And regeneration can't be done unless it is organic, because that would imply that there's something impairing the biome of the soil. Okay.
So let me break this down. So what you're saying is we need bacteria and funguses in the soil. And the way we do that is we grow the plants, they die, they decay, they go back into the soil, and they keep regenerating the same fungus and bacteria, to where instead of putting glyphosate on there that just kills everything, so they can't be reused.
That's one way to look at it. Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Not directly that specific plant in that specific place necessarily. But regeneration does mean making sure that you're composting and things like that. Ideally, any sort of regeneration would be done within the location. Like if you had a farm, you would do it right there on that farm. It doesn't mean you can't have other agricultural inputs, but what you're not doing, though, is you're adding inorganic amendments and fertilizers to the soil. You're taking what's there, what's already available to you, downed wood, using, putting it in chips and then putting it back into the soil. If you're a person who farms, does some animal husbandry, that you're using the waste from the animals, and you're actually utilizing that to actually rebuild the soil base too. So you're taking what's already there and you're regenerating the soil in that regard. And it's not, obviously everybody can't do this. Or has the means to do it. Some people live in apartments and things like that. So there's other ways to support those systems, but yet regeneration of the soil is the key component that actually supports the ecosystem part of it, because you're retaining extra water on the farm, you're building the microbial base. Because you're doing it more organically, but regeneratively, and so that ultimately it rebuilds itself in a particular location, so that you're not having to constantly bring in extra things in order to make sure that you can grow in it.
Right. So you were saying composting. What exactly is compost? What do you do? So basically, instead of using these toxic chemicals, glyphosate and everything that's in Roundup and all these companies that spray your lawn, instead of using that, you use compost instead, right? So what exactly is compost? Tell everybody what compost is made up of.
Well, the compost that I make basically has super high nitrogen source, but high nitrogen, you've got green source, you've got your brown sources, so that you're making sure that you're pulling in, and you're going for diversity. You're pulling those in from a variety of different sources, and then you're putting it all together and letting it break down, so that by the time you're actually utilizing it in sort of a growing operation, that you have the microbial base available that is actually breaking it down in order to make what is there actually plant available. And that's why you don't need fertilization when you're doing it that way.
So when you're saying you're bringing in these different sources, what are you talking about? What sources?
Grass chip, grass clippings. I actually take it a little bit to the extreme.
Not you.
When I cut up my vegetables, I'll take the ends of it, whatever's left over. And, some people throw it into a compost pile. I'll actually freeze it. I have enough freezer space that I'll freeze it. And then I'll make a big pile, put it all together so that I can have it, working all together at the same time. Because what you want is diversity. You want glass clippings. You want, the ends of the broccoli, if you don't like to eat that, the ends of the tomato, because all of those things attract different types of bacteria. And the difference in those bacteria, the diversity, just like the human biome, the diversity in the human biome is what creates its resiliency. It's the same thing for plants. So the diversity in the soil base is the thing that makes the difference for the health of the plants. Mm-hmm. So then they can develop their own host basically immune systems, just like a human being. Right. And they're stronger, they produce better, the soil is better, it will retain more water, and it'll have higher yields too. So there's
go ahead.
There's a lot of similarities between plant
right
biome and human biome.
Right. And that's what I was going to say is like, so what you're saying is you are feeding the plants the nutrients it needs, the protein, the amino acids, everything it needs, but you're also the electrolytes and also the minerals, and then also the bacteria. The bacteria is so important in this. And just like you said, that's exactly how we are. Mm-hmm. If we just feed ourselves good, healthy protein for our building blocks, fat for our energy source, and that's going to replenish the bacteria that's in our gut that is so healthy for us, mm-hmm. and be the right kind of bacteria. You start messing that ecosystem up by buying toxins on the inner aisles of the stores, you totally change the the bacteria in your gut, and that mm-hmm. starts wreaking all kinds of havoc, just like this is doing with the plants. That's why Angela and I, that's why our paths have been so together, because we are, if you're doing this right, you are one with your environment. That's why you should walk barefooted, get down, dig with your hands, be what do you do? Do you go out there and love on your plants? Like I've got several friends who do. They say that makes them grow just as well.
You need to talk to them.
Yeah. In fact, you'd like for me to go do that right now, would you?
As soon as we get off of this, I'm going to go out and talk to my plants. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like in this drought, here's a big thing. I had a small post about this. We're in like extreme heat right now, and the integrity of the plants is also stronger when you manage the biology in the soil. Some people get out there and they water every day. Well, it's hot out, you got to water every day. I'm like, no, what you have to do is set your plants up for success on the front side, meaning that if you don't water frequently, the roots will go down not much deeper, and they'll actually be more resilient in these, types of situations. But yeah, I go out and I talk to my plants. I'm like, it's time to grow now.
They don't talk back, do they? Just
well,
in a way.
Well, they grow, I guess. Technically,
there you go. So I don't want to go too far before we also talk about your book, because just like our paths have just kind of mimicked each other, now you're writing a book also. What's the name of your book and what is it about?
Oh, okay. Destination Real Food, because we've kind of lost the real food part of it in our society. Yeah. Navigating our food system and restoring the soil to improve health. And I was about halfway through writing the book when I started jumping into the biome part of the soil. I actually took these classes that were from the leading microbiologist, I think, on the planet. And anyone can take these classes, but I was like, this is the piece that was missing for the book. And so I ended up changing the book title and writing a whole lot more about soil health just because of it, because that component of it was just missing in the book. But I knew, like, sometimes you intuitively know something, but you can't like get your hands on or your head around what's actually going on. And so those classes made the biggest difference for me, because, from the nutrition side of things, in this country, what happens is that we eat what we subsidize in America, and that's what's most available to us. So unfortunately, and I'm going to use your terms, now there's all this poison available to us that we call food, that is highly processed, not good for us because of those subsidizations. Because what do subsidies essentially do? But they skew what is available. Okay. And so when that happens, then then you go to the convenience store, and there's literally nothing there that you can purchase to eat that's not going to challenge your system in some way.
Right.
So unless you're one of those ultra prepared people, which like carries a cooler in your car with you everywhere you go, I mean, there's going to be influences on your microbiome just by virtue of what's available to you.
Right.
So understanding that was a big deal. And like with that 2.5-year-old that we were talking about earlier, that was their situation. You know, they weren't going to be able to get out of that, unfortunately. You know, but for people who do want to make an influence and, you know, want to read the book, I start off with just looking at the food policy around why it is the way that it is. And the subsidization is so big that, you know, without the American people, and I call us eaters.
I think
Everybody
we
has to eat. As eaters, unless we decide as American consumers that we're going to change our internal narrative around food and how it is that we want to think about it, then these things they're not going to change. They're just not going to change. So, you know, by teaching people though that you do in fact vote with your fork, and you support the system. You support the system where you spend those dollars. That actually speaks volumes to a food producer, because like if you're a local food producer, then that means that they can go on for another year if you have enough support. But for the industrialized system, they're essentially going to stop producing things that aren't going to be purchased.
Right.
Now that sounds a little extreme and like I think for some people might sound way out there, but the thing is that it does actually work that way. I mean, there's 22,000 new processed food products on the market every year. And if we understood that if we didn't buy that next trendy item, which, you know, it's kind of fun, and I bought into it for a while too, you know, but you start looking at all the food labels, and there's no food transparency in America. We don't actually know what we're eating. And I think you and Spence talked about that on his interview. But unless you know the farmer that's producing your food, or you're producing your food for yourself, it's very difficult to influence your health, if not impossible on some level. So looking at it from that perspective, what it also does though is it sounds overwhelming on some level to some people if you haven't done it before, but the more you do it, the more you love to do it, because it's that engaging, and that also makes the right choice the easy choice. Okay.
Right.
So it makes it more fun. You know, if you're growing a tomato, you know, and you've never done it before, just the excitement of, I have a tomato, you know, I grew a tomato.
Especially if you have a child that you're showing to grow, they really get excited about it.
It's infectious in that way. And that, like, if you pull people in, like, okay, I'm going to have some friends over now because we're going to eat this tomato together because I put a lot of work into this tomato.
That's right.
Or whatever it is. It doesn't even matter, because food is fun, especially when shared. And food also pulls people together. And the other way that the right choice becomes the easy choice is just by breaking bread together, by eating together, by making that salsa out of that tomato together, and just laughing about, I can't even believe I did this. Isn't this so cool? Or, that kombucha experiment. I use this example in the book, the kombucha experiment that went wrong and splurted all over the ceiling. It can be frustrating, but it can also be just so fun in so many ways. And then you just, if you mess something up, you just go out to eat or something. But you tried, and that's the big deal. It doesn't matter whether we fail or not when it comes to food. What matters is that we're trying, and that we continue to try to do it differently in order to affect our health.
Right. And if we could get people to change the way they think about this, and really think about, when you're shopping the periphery of the store where you have the real meat, real fruit, real vegetables, you can think of that as, I'm eating food, because that's actually God-made food. That's what we're supposed to do.
Real food.
If you're eating anything down the middle of the aisle, you say, I'm eating chemicals. That's all you're doing. You're just eating chemical after chemical, and it's so inflammatory to your body. And just like Angela said, if you are buying the chemical stuff to feed you, that means you are making that manufacturer that much more rich, so they can put that kind of crap out there. If you can eat real food, real meat, real fruit, vegetables, then that's where they're going to put it. Because right now, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Angela, but I think the biggest subsidies that our government pays is for corn, wheat, and soy. Is that right? Is that still
Those
right?
are big ones. They also subsidize dairy, the wrong kind of dairy.
The wrong kind of dairy, right?
And meats, and there's cotton, and there's a whole bunch of them. But
and that's because that's the kind of stuff that's going into your food. That they use all these chemicals, put that stuff in your food. And that's why it's so sad to me when people who have like celiac disease, they're like, oh my gosh, do you know there is gluten in everything? It is so hard. It's like, no, it's not. It's not in real meat, and it's not in real fruits and real vegetables. If you stick there, gluten is just a wheat protein. And obviously, if you're going to eat anything in the ultra processed, bag, box, bottle, can, chances are you're right. You're going to be getting some gluten in there because they use wheat, soy, and corn in everything.
Yep.
So people they make it harder than it really is. It's like, instead of reading all these labels, trying to find out what you can and can't eat, don't eat something with a label on it. Or don't eat anything with a label on it that has more than like 3 ingredients. Because if there's a bunch of ingredients, all you're doing is putting chemicals in your body, and it's not food, and your body knows it's not food. And that's why you continue to be hungry all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think Michael Pollan said it best, which, 20 years ago, Michael Pollan made me mad, but I'm like, what does he know about food? He's not a dietitian.
Is it?
We've seen that one documentary he has. He's good. I like him.
He wrote several books, but what the books did for me anyway was made me dig further also. So I started looking. I'm like, is this true? I mean, and I think you mentioned the big 3, corn, wheat, and soy. He's like, corn, wheat, and soy is in everything that's processed. And I'm like, it is not. And so I started reading more about it, reading the labels, and I thought, oh my gosh, how does this journalist know more than I do about food?
Isn't that crazy? That's how I've been with everything I've been learning about nutrition. It's like, oh my gosh, this information's been out here for forever, and just nobody's talking about it. Nobody's reading it. That's why you and I are doing what we're doing, trying to get this information out there, thinking this isn't new stuff we're coming up with. It's just things that are being hidden by the food manufacturing, drug manufacturers, and the sugar industry.
Yeah.
They don't want a healthy way to eat, because they won't make money if you're eating healthy.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly right.
That is. Right. And just like what you were talking about, taking your kids and playing in the soil, like a lot of like people my age-ish, it's like our parents didn't teach us that, because all the processed food was really it was coming out. So the convenience of all those foods. So nobody thinks about it not being real food.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you have to be like, okay, we're going to start here. And with my children, we're going to show how to do this.
And I really don't think that they did this on purpose. I think when they very first started the dietary guidelines, they really did think that it was fat that made you have cardiovascular disease, and that fat was what made you fat. I think they really did. But now everybody knows that that is not correct. It is not fat that you eat that makes you fat. It's the carbohydrates that you eat that make you fat. And it's the bad kind of fat, because it's all kinds of triglycerides. Anyway, when they first started, they didn't know that, but now they do. Now there's nothing they can do, because this information is everywhere about how carbohydrates are what's causing all of the conditions we have, really, and all this processed food. We haven't seen. I mean, our type 2 diabetes has increased. Not increased. It's skyrocketed. Our obesity has skyrocketed. Cancer has skyrocketed. Skin conditions, Alzheimer's. Yeah, type 3 diabetes is Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. All these things, cancers. All these things have skyrocketed since 1977, since 1980, when the new dietary guidelines come out. So it makes sense now when you read about proper nutrition, why all this ultra processed food is causing all these conditions, but nobody's talking about it. Nobody will tell you about it, because again, they're actually telling you that this stuff is healthy. Continue to eat it.
Well, yes, and here's the other piece of this too, from the dietitian standpoint, I guess I should say, like our national organization does not necessarily support they support what we're talking about, but they're also saying that the other stuff is okay, and that's where I totally disagree with them. You can't, if you're doing 10% of your calories from something that's sugar based, which is what they say is okay. You're not going to move the needle the other direction on your health. I mean, you do have to be super diligent. And I'm not going to, like, no pun intended, but sugarcoat. Sugarcoat. No, it can be done otherwise, because the thing is that like we are living longer than ever before, sicker than ever before, on more medications than ever before. The only exception to that pendulum going that direction was with COVID, for obvious reasons. Okay, so the message has to be, decrease all the additional processed foods, take out the additives, the colors, and all of those things, because despite the fact that they'll say it's okay, it's just not. It disrupts
It's a
the
lie.
microbiome.
Yeah, it's a
And,
lie.
we all have experienced not feeling well on some level, and then going, what's going on there from the nutrition standpoint? What it was that I was reading with the guidelines didn't make sense. It didn't add up to actually helping people. And that's why I started digging further, because I was like, something's not right here. It's just not right. And so some people may be unaware of this. I'll just point it out. And that is, like, during COVID, they actually relaxed the guidelines for food manufacturers to be able to add food in that wasn't actually on the label as a substitution.
Oh, really?
So unlike so we even further with the food transparency part of it are unaware of what's going on. So, I mean, it was meant to support food manufacturers. At least that was the presentation of it. But I just, I mean, it makes it even harder. And the more you dive into it, the more you realize that you really have to know where your food is coming from. And the only way to do that is to know your farmer or to grow it yourself. And again, that sounds daunting, but more and more people are coming out with this understanding, and those relationships are being developed. And that's the part that keeps it going.
Right. And I love, supporting the local farmers and having all these farmers markets are just wonderful. And they've got them everywhere. I mean, you just have, some places, depending on where you live, you have to look for it, but you have to realize, I mean, this is it's not as hard as you think. People who are used to eating processed food are not used to being full. They aren't really used to feeling satiated, because the ultra processed food, there's no nutrients. It's nutrient void, and your body will continue to be hungry until it gets the nutrients it needs, which is protein and fat, basically. So people who think, oh, there's no way, I could afford to eat meat, when this stuff is so cheap. You've got to understand, when you eat meat and fat, it keeps you satiated. It will keep you full for a long period of time. So if you eat meat and fat, you're talking basically about having 1 or 2 meals of just meat. If you want some vegetables, that's fine. Versus all the amount of money you spend all through the day snacking on cookies, crackers, chips, going out to eat at fast food restaurants, all these convenience things, soda pop. These convenience things, the price on those add up, and it definitely adds up the price on your body when you get put on, medication after medication, doctor's bills, hospitalizations, all that stuff. If you avoid the processed food, you can avoid the medications, doctor bills, hospitals, all that, and you aren't going to be hungry all the time. So people who have done this, who have had, instead of poo-pooing the whole idea, they've realized maybe I can do this, and they do it. They come back and they say, it's cheaper. I thought I was going to be more expensive eating this healthy way. And it's not. It's cheaper because you're very succinct in what you're buying. You know exactly what you're buying. It's exactly the nutrients. And you aren't buying all the snacks and everything else that's killing us. And so don't use money as an excuse, because that's not it. And if you do, you got to figure in the cost of your medications, doctor bills, and hospital bills too, because that all goes with that type of eating.
You really do. Yeah.
But,
I'll add in a layer to that, because I agree 100% with everything you just said. The layer is that what people also don't realize is that, in particular with two foods, dairy products and wheat products, when you eat them from the satiation side of things, have somewhat of an opioid-like effect. And so, like, people are unaware that it's almost like you're being drugged on some level.
Yes, you are.
And, I've had, when I've worked with clients, them tell me, well, I'm eating the way you're telling me, but I just don't feel full. I said, you don't feel full, or you don't feel like sedated, because that's how they will feel. He's like, that's what it is, isn't it? I have one client in particular I'm thinking of. And I'm like, yeah, you don't feel sedated, and here's the other thing. I mean, that's where you no longer you don't get that brain fog associated with eating, because you're doing it right. And he's like, I do have more energy. And I'm like, so our focus tends to, we don't even realize sometimes that what we're doing is something that there's this other ancillary effect that's pulling us in. And the food manufacturers also know that. They quite literally, I had somebody who worked for a large food manufacturer, said he couldn't do it anymore. All this side information when you're all into the food, food movement. He's like, I worked for this large manufacturer. He goes, literally what we would do would be to create foods that people would then crave. So it was a combination of all the extra additives and that they were adding in there that were trying to pull people back in. And it's, so there's this manipulation of these food products, these highly processed food products that people are just unaware of too. And so who would we be and how would we be acting without that component of it? Because those things are also totally disrupting our microbiome.
Yeah.
So where would we be if we were all just eating, zero processed foods? I fall prey to that on occasion too, but if we can keep ourselves away from that and more towards, like you were talking about with the real food products, then everything changes. It really does.
Absolutely.
I know, it's crazy. It's, and you're talking about, they keep you, it's called the bliss point. They bring you in for the food manufacturers, it's called the bliss point. So they want it sweet enough to keep you hungry and coming back for more, but not so sweet that it makes you sick.
Yeah.
So they get this bliss point, which they fill in with high fructose corn syrup, which is fructose is very toxic to your body. But that's one of the big problems is they give you this food, there's no nutrient value, and they keep getting you hungry and you keep coming back for more and more and more. And just like Angela said, you don't realize how really, really crappy you feel until you start eating healthy. You start drinking water, getting good sleep, doing a little bit of more movement, and then you start eating real God-made food with real meat, real fruits, real vegetables. You're going to have more energy. You're going to think more clear. I used to get tired around 2:00 every afternoon. I never get tired like that anymore. And it's so weird how much better you feel, the energy and everything. And these are things that people just don't even realize. And that's what I love about what I'm doing. Because now that we've been telling people, and they'll be sending me, Facebook messages and all this kind of stuff saying, thank you so much. I lost 26 pounds and I feel great. And, I felt great the whole time. And that's where you're going to know that you're doing it right. If you're trying to lose weight and you feel horrible doing it, then you are not doing it the right way, because there is a good way that you can lose weight and you'll feel great doing it. And it's this: avoid ultra processed food and stick with the real food all the way across.
Yeah, I agree totally. I agree totally. And so, we as consumers, the focus on my book, it has to do with supporting the right food systems. A lot of it has to do with that. So of course you have to educate people on the front side about what is actually going on with our food systems, our largest industrialized food system that provides this wide scale availability of the wrong type of food. And then promoting the understanding of building those relationships, because that is in fact what keeps it going. And you can also build large economies around it. I mean, there's studies about the information regarding, and this is again why the right choice becomes the easy choice, because once you realize that you go out and support that local farmer, you ensure on some level to begin with, I mean, not just one consumer, but if more people do it, but you ensure on some level that food is going to be available to you. And then that farmer also in turn is actually more likely to support other local businesses if they're doing it right. Okay. Right. Which they are. A lot of these people at the farmers markets, for the most part, already have this understanding. That's why they're there.
Right.
They're like, I'm watching this and I want to be able to have healthy food available for my children. And so then before they know it, they're producing all this extra food, and then they're going to the farmers markets. I mean, that's literally some of their story, not all of them, but right. But I there's no downside to it. There's no downside to it.
And that brings up another thing: is looking for restaurants in your area where they say that they serve food from local farmers. That what's called food to table or
farm to table.
Farm to table. Yeah. Look for the farm to table, because if you're eating at those restaurants, then that means you're helping to support that farmer that's going to be giving you the nutritious things.
Absolutely.
Don't just go to these, pop up. I'm not going to mention any. Everybody knows what fast food restaurants are, but man, you have no idea how detrimental that is to your body, to your health, to your quality of life. And if you're young now, please realize it will get on you. If you don't make your changes, it won't take very long, and all of a sudden you're going to start feeling all the aches, the pains, and spend your money in the medical field. And you can avoid all of it right now. And if you've started doing this, even if you're going down a bad path, even if you already have type 2 diabetes, even if you're kind of starting to get into, some issues with your kidneys or whatever, it's never too late to change. It's never too late to change. And it's up to you. You know, you could totally reverse it. If you're on a bunch of medications, you could get off the medications. They'll tell you you can't. They're called maintenance meds because they think you'll be on forever. But that's what irritates me in the pharmacy. We have these what's called maintenance meds for blood pressure, blood glucose, cholesterol, all this crap. And they call maintenance meds because they basically tell them you're going to be on this forever, and you will. And they're probably going to be adding more and more and more as you go along. But that's because they say that they don't think that anybody wants to change their nutrition. Everybody knows, any study you read, they always say, you know, this can be taken care of with proper nutrition and exercise. But since nobody wants to eat healthy, then you can have this drug. I mean, that's basically kind of what it is. And
that's exactly what it is.
And I want people to stand up and say, oh, you are wrong. I do care, and I do want to eat healthy. So I do want to know the right information so I can get off this medication.
You know, you and I both have worked in the conventional medical system. And unfortunately, what happens there is exactly what you said. Most physicians don't have any nutrition education. I think it's getting a little bit better, but the number of times I've heard from a physician in the hospital setting, if it tastes good, spit it out. I just I'm like, ugh.
Yeah,
Stop it. You know, because food that's raised regeneratively does taste better.
Yes,
I mean, when you've had an organic or regeneratively raised carrot, for instance, I mean, it just tastes so much better. And that's another one of those associations. If something tastes better, you're more likely to eat it. You're more likely to ask for it. Okay. The physician's part of it, you know, I use an example in my book, you know, pretty much if physicians would get on board with understanding that they do have a tremendous influence on their patients, because the number of times I've had a patient come back to me say, well, my doctor didn't say that I needed to manage it that way. I'm like, well, that's okay. But I'm going to tell you the truth. Well, why would I believe a dietitian over a physician? Well, because we're right. because we're a society of convenience, it's so much easier for us to pop a pill, you know?
Yeah.
But again, if we draw people back to the farming component of it so that they can see how much fun it is, because what we do now is we equate it to hard work. And it is, just like the example that you gave with weeding your yard. It is a little bit more work on the front side, but what that act does is it keeps you that much healthier. And ultimately you may not even need me, which would be my desire, to put myself out of business.
Right.
Because once you understand that piece of it, then there isn't any going back from it, because you don't want to. You just don't want to, because it's so much fun. It's so much more fun.
Right.
If you're gathering that food out of the yard, and you have a weed-free garden, which is another thing that the biome of the soil helps with. I don't pull weeds. I have one weed after 1.5 months, one weed in my garden.
Okay.
One.
You definitely need to come.
I left it there.
You can come over and help anytime you want.
We're doing something wrong.
No,
you're not.
Actually,
Yeah.
You guys are just getting started with it.
So
That's
in
right.
your book, do you explain a lot of that? Like how
Oh,
to
yeah.
do all this, how to get started type of thing? Like even with gardens, or
I don't go into as much depth in it. I mean, most of the book ends up being, because when it comes to food systems work, I mean, you can get into, pun intended, you can get into the weeds pretty quickly on a lot of things. But most of the book had more to do with just making sure that people understood what was going on so they could make wiser decisions for themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I bring it down to 10 things that people can do regardless of whether you have access to a garden or not. You know, grow something, grow anything. I don't care if it's a rosemary plant on your back deck. Just get used to sticking your hands in the soil and relating to food in a very different way, because it changes your world. It just does.
It does.
I love that.
And I love what you said earlier, because it's true. Regenerative, this food is it just tastes so good. And so many people now, if it doesn't taste sweet, they don't think it tastes good. I mean, you say, oh man, try this, you know, whatever, carrot or Brussels sprout or something. You know, I want sweet. Can you put sugar on it? And that's what we need to get people off of. They need to think, instead of thinking that the taste of sweet is good, they need to think the taste of sweet is bad. If you pick something up and it tastes sweet, you need to stop right there and don't put anything else in your mouth. And once you get off of that taste of sweet, you're going to find that there's a whole bunch of wonderful flavors out there that you didn't know. It's just like smoking. It's just like smoking. You know, when you smoke, food tastes horrible. And then all of a sudden you quit smoking. And now I don't know this. I actually never smoked, but I have many friends
I
and
did.
family members who do.
Did you really?
But you do. I mean, okay, then when you
yeah.
stop smoking, did food taste better? That's what I've always heard. It tastes so much better.
It does taste better. It does taste better. Well, the thing I want to draw on there, like when you quit smoking, and just like when you start eating better, what also happens is that you don't realize how bad you felt until you felt better. Because I have a lot of people who, in consultation, well, I don't feel that bad. I'm like, you have insulin resistance, and some of them are smokers. I'm like, I understand that you don't realize that, but yet, but yet you're here because you don't have any energy. And so that's the same thing. Or my favorite one is when people say, I don't have high blood pressure, but they're on 3 medications to control it.
Right.
I'm like, no, you don't. But let's talk about the rest of the story.
That's right. And again, like you said, they're on the blood pressure medicine to control it. Blood pressure medicine doesn't treat, doesn't clear up blood pressure, doesn't fix it, doesn't fix problem. Nutrition does.
Yes,
Nutrition will stop that. If you don't stop the base, the root cause, you're going to just keep on being more and more meds. Anyway.
Truth.
Go on and on.
That's how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about?
Oh my gosh, we could go on for hours.
I know. It is weird because what you said, and I've even heard dietitians tell our type 2 diabetics is that basically it doesn't matter what kind of carbohydrates they eat as long as they know how many there are, decrease the amount, and they give them the right amount of insulin for it. And they don't specify what kind, whatever carbohydrate you want. This ultra processed toxic crud that you get in box balls, bag cans, they don't care as long as you give them the right insulin. And that makes me cringe. I think that is the total worst advice. If you're a diabetic, my view is stop eating carbohydrates, period. Even fruits and vegetables. Even fruits. If you want some and you can tolerate them, that's fine. Don't eat very many of them. But all carbohydrates are glucose. Glucose raises your blood glucose, and that raises your insulin, and that's why you're diabetic in the first place. So quit putting glucose in your body. You're going to quit. You quit making your insulin levels high, which means you'll be able to take care of your type 2 diabetes. And Angela has been telling everybody this. I've been telling everybody this. I hope people realize how important this is. Just stick to good, healthy food.
Eat real food. Yeah. Eat real food. Yeah. I will add one more thing in there. And that is that from the food system standpoint, there are communities out there that are people that are building food systems around farms. And I use an example in my book. I call it vitality, not by mistake, because people can build their own vitality by building these relationships around them, by making sure that they're supporting local food systems. And so there are areas around the country called like agriburbias. Those are agriculturally based communities. If we build communities around golf courses, why can't we do it around food, right? Hey. So there's people doing it. And actually, I'm involved with something here locally that eventually maybe we can talk more about, but it is more of like an eco-village type setup where they are wanting to have people come on the farm, actually live there. Some people will actually build residences there, and there will be ancillary businesses associated with the location. Well, and so that piece of it, like if you think about it, if you're bringing people together around food, then what you can do is you can build those systems around food, and you start thinking about it like we did in the 1940s. The industrialization of food kind of took the burden of responsibility off of people to have to produce their own food because it was then being provided back to them. But back in the day, everybody had a garden. Absolutely everybody had a garden because there wasn't this one-stop shopping place to get these things done. And so the fact that people are, and I think when I pulled up the information from, I think it was APA, they indicate that there are at least one of these sorts of developments in every single state now at this point. And I know that there's one up closer to St. Louis, and then there's one going to be coming down in Southwest Missouri here too. And it's exciting to me because I'm going to help them grow some food.
Yeah. I would let us know. I'd like to go see it. I'd like to see what what we might be interested in.
Sure. I mean, it should be, it should be a lot of fun too. I mean, I'm just oozing excitement here.
You're almost vibrating.
Right. Yeah. So I can't think of anything else that I.
Okay.
For,
All right. Let's talk again about the name of your book and where. So, when are you thinking it's going to be ready?
It's in formatting right now. So I was hoping to have it out before the end of June. So, I mean, you all know how this goes. It's like one more thing and one more thing.
Maybe around November. It's amazing how many things come up at the very end of getting your book out.
I'm like, why didn't you tell me this on the front side? That wasn't on the list.
That's right.
So hopefully by the end of July, at the very latest, every time something happens, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make time to get that done.
Yeah. So, and what was the name again of the
Destination book? Real Food, Navigating Our Food System and Restoring the Soil to Improve Health.
So whenever your book does come out, we'll definitely talk about it on social media. But do they go to this website here, or do you have a different?
All Health is Local.
Yeah, you can go to allhealthislocal.com. Of course, that's my focus, is bringing, everybody needs to understand about food environments too. I mean, the environment that is most immediate to you is the biggest influence on your health, as with that 2.5-year-old. So that's where that website name came from. So yes, I have on there the posting, just it says book to come in June. So I'm gonna have to change that to July, but
or August or September. So just say coming soon.
The end of July.
Okay, and then we'll have this website on the bottom of the podcast also, so people can see that and
in the show notes.
And in the show notes.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This was always fun. Always fun getting together with you.
Right. I agree.
And whenever you want to come over and help finish digging up these weeds by the roots, we're almost done, actually.
Next year will be so easy. Easy.
I'm already looking forward to next year. Andrew, thank you so much for being on our podcast. And thank you guys so much for listening, and have a great week. And remember, make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life.